Hey, good morning, everybody. We are so excited that you are tuning in to Revision Online today. It's been a crazy week, unlike anything I've ever experienced, and as much as we'd like to gather in person, we're convinced that love compels us. For the sake of flattening the spike and dealing with this thing, our president has declared a national emergency to meet only online for the next few weeks, and so that's where we're going to be. But we are going to worship today, we're going to meet God today, and we're going to hear from God today. So thanks so much for tuning in. We're excited to have you here.
Hey Revision Online, we're putting announcements right at the beginning today, and we have a few of really important ones for you. First, 100 hours of prayer starts tomorrow. We want to cover the Easter season in prayer, especially this Easter season where there are so many unknowns for so many people. So we're asking as many people as possible to commit to praying 4 minutes a day for the next 4 weeks. We'll be praying for the churches around the city, praying for Revision, and praying that God will move in big ways. If you haven't signed up yet, you can do it today by emailing mike@revisiondsm.org, or using the link we've posted on Facebook and in This Week at Revision. We'd love for you to be part of this powerful movement of prayer. There are 5 Sundays in March, and that means it's Reach Des Moines month. We're excited about the chance to go out and be the church and live out the gospel by serving our city on Sunday the 29th. And our plan right now is to go ahead with Reach Des Moines with a few modifications on the organizations we're partnering with. But we're also aware that coronavirus is causing plans to change quickly all around the country. So stay tuned for details about serving on the 29th. Next week, we'll be meeting online at 10 a.m. again, and since we've decided to make the shift to online-only meetings for the next few weeks, we're also going to have no official house group meetings for the next 2 weeks. Again, things are rapidly changing, so stay tuned, but we aren't planning to have groups meet for the next 2 weeks. Parents, we hope that church online will be an experience that families can enjoy and experience together, but we also realize that some younger kids won't want to sit through the entire service. And since we're passionate about the next generation and we don't want them to miss out learning more about who God is and who He created them to be, we've made some Revision Kids videos and lesson plans available for you to use. You can find them in your email or on the Revision Kids tab on our website. At this point, I'd like to call the ushers forward to receive an offering. Just kidding. We don't have ushers or buckets to pass this morning, but we still would like to invite you to be part of making this community go through your generosity. We receive an offering every week because it's an opportunity for us to worship God and be obedient to His call to give back to Him as an acknowledgement that He's the source of all we have. Giving grows our faith, and God uses our generosity to build a better future for our world. So here's how you can give today. You can give on our website, you can give on the Revision app, or you can give by texting Revision to 77977. Each of those will give you the chance to give one time or set up recurring generosity so that we can keep moving forward even on days when we miss meeting together. Thanks for being generous. Thanks for building the future with us.
Well, hey, I know I'm probably the third person to say this already today, but welcome to Revision Church Online. We're excited to have you guys here. It's a little different this morning, but I hope that this can be a meaningful time for all of us. I know for me, I tend to spend a lot of time, on YouTube or whatever, watching music videos, different worship songs, and so maybe it'll be easy for you to just kind of let yourself slip into that idea of, hey, this is just another song that I'm listening to, another video that I'm watching. But I really want to encourage you right now as we open our time just singing a couple songs together. I know you're probably at home, maybe with your family, maybe you're by yourself. It looks a little different than a normal Sunday morning, but I want to encourage you, just take a moment to kind of still your heart, to stop and remind yourself of what we're doing right now. And so we're going to sing some songs. I know it's online, it's through video, it's a little different, but hopefully this can be a meaningful time for you to connect with Jesus. I really encourage you, sing along if you want, pray along, maybe that's what you're into, or just listen and really allow the lyrics and these songs to minister to you today. So we're going to sing. Would you guys do that with us? 1, 2, 3, 4. How great the chasm that lay between us, how high the mountain I could not climb. In desperation I turned to heaven
and spoke your name into the night. Then through the darkness, your loving kindness tore through the shadows of my soul. The work is finished, the end is written. Oh, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Sing, who could imagine? Who could imagine so great a mercy? What heart could fathom such boundless grace? The God of ages stepped down from glory to wear my sin and bear my shame. The cross has spoken, I am forgiven. The King of Kings calls me his own. Beautiful Savior, I'm yours forever. Oh, Jesus Christ, my living hope. And hallelujah, praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Your very body began to breathe. Out of the silence, the roaring lion declared the grave is no claim on. Let's sing that again. Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Your very body began to breathe. Out of the silence, the roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. Oh, Jesus, yours is a victory. And hallelujah, praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. And hallelujah, praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. And Jesus Christ, my living hope. Oh, Jesus Christ, my living hope. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes on this journey, get lost in my mistakes. But looks to me like weakness is a canvas for your strength. And my story isn't over, yeah, my story's just begun. Your failure won't define me, 'cause that's what my Father does. Your failure won't define me, 'cause that's what my Father does. Ooh, lay your burdens down. Ooh, here in the Father's house, just check your shame at the door, 'cause it ain't welcome anymore. Ooh, you're in the Father's house, yeah. Arrival's not the end game, the journey's where you are. You never wanted perfect, you just wanted my heart. And the story isn't over if the story isn't good. A failure's never final when the Father's in the room. No, no, a failure's never final when the Father's in the room. Shame at the door, 'cause it ain't welcome anymore. Ooh, you're in the Father's house, yeah. Prodigals come home, the helpless find hope. Love is on the move when the Father's in the room. Prison doors fling wide, the dead come to life. Love is on the move when the Father's in the room. Hear it. Miracles take place, the cynical find faith. Oh, love is on the move when the Father's in the room. And Jericho walls are quaking, strongholds now are shaking. Love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. Love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. Oh, lay your burdens down. Oh, here in the Father's house, just check your shame at the door, 'cause it ain't welcome anymore. Ooh, you're in the Father's house, yeah. One more time.
Hey, what's up, Revision? I'm so excited to be back this week after spending a few weeks talking church planting both internationally and in the United States of America. Even if this isn't quite the venue I thought I'd be coming back to, just fired up for what God has to say to us today. We are living in an interesting and in some ways unprecedented time in history. Over the last week, we've seen a global pandemic sweep across our country. Disney World is closed. The NBA, NHL, Major League Baseball, and NCAA have shut down completely. And worst of all, March Madness is canceled. I don't even know what I'm going to do with my life. And there's massive economic upheaval, and people all around us are panicking. I mean, you can't go to Hy-Vee, Walmart, Costco, or Sam's Club right now without seeing people's shopping carts and wondering, how much toilet paper does the average American go through in a week? I gotta be honest with you guys, I don't think you're using it right if you need 200 rolls for the next month. But the confusing rush on toilet paper aside, coronavirus is a very real threat. And the fear and anxiety surrounding this crisis are very real as well. And they're amplified by the fact that we live in a society that clings very tightly to the veneer of control. We really like to believe we can manage and manipulate our situations however we want. We love believing we're in control. William Ernest Hensley's words in the famous poem Invictus could be the motto of American life. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. But all it's taken over the last few weeks is a tiny microscopic organism to remind all of us that's just not true. And our world is freaking out and searching for an anchor somewhere. And I believe this is a moment where the church needs to stand up and be counted. This is a crisis into which the church must walk so our world knows that come what may, they do not stand alone. Now is the time for the people of Jesus to speak hope into despair, faith into fear, and light into darkness. That doesn't mean being irresponsible or ignoring our charge to care well for one another and protect the most vulnerable among us. That's why we're meeting online for the next few weeks. We're going to do whatever we need to do, whatever the experts tell us we ought to do in order to care well for this community and show love. Being the church God made us to be doesn't mean ignoring the seriousness of this threat, but it does mean we have a unique role to play because of the unique story we have to tell and the unique, bold, fearless hope that lives inside of us. You guys, events may be canceled all around us, but relationships will not be canceled. Conversations will not be canceled. Love will not be canceled. Our lives are crashing into the lives of people around us every single day, which means we have the opportunity to make a difference. Coronavirus is a pandemic. We can't stop that. But as I look around, I'm convinced that here and now, fear is quickly becoming a pandemic. And that's where the church has to step in and say, we are here. We believe. We are not afraid. We speak life. I think we have something incredible to learn from King David about how to do that, how we can relate to the people around us, how to use the influence we have in their lives to point them toward hope. I'm really pumped to jump back into the Warrior Poet series this morning. We've had guest speakers the last couple weeks, but today we're going to resume this series where we've been digging into the story of David in 1st and 2nd Samuel, which is the longest, most detailed narrative presentation of a single human life in all of ancient literature. And we've been learning through David's life about who God is and how God relates to us and who God made us to be. And this morning, we're going to take a look at David's completely countercultural response to being given power and position, and how his response changed the game for the people around him. And again, I'm convinced if we can embrace that same countercultural mindset, then we can stand in the gap during a time of crisis in a way that ends up writing a better story, creating a better future for the frightened, concerned, overwhelmed people our lives intersect with during this moment. We can do that in the same way Captain Mike Drowley did it on the night of August 16th, 2002. Drowley was known by the call sign Johnny Bravo, and he and his wingman were flying A-10 Warthogs high above a thick layer of clouds in Afghanistan that night. And the Warthog is maybe the most unsophisticated aircraft used by the U.S. military. It's basically an 8-barrel Gatling gun with a seat strapped to the top and a plane built around it. It is slow and unsexy and designed for one purpose: low-level, close-range support of troops on the ground. And despite the loud rumble of its engines that night, it was really beautiful above the clouds. As Johnny Bravo flew, he could see stars speckling all over, making the clouds below look like freshly fallen snow. But beneath those clouds was a team of 22 Special Forces soldiers, making their way through a rocky valley in a pitch-black night in pursuit of a high-level Taliban operative. Now, ideally, planes in the sky and troops on the ground are able to see one another, so they can have visual reassurance that, things are okay down there and help is available up there. But on this night, it was impossible. And Johnny Bravo could sense by the voices he heard over his radio that the troops felt something wasn't right. So he felt compelled to act. He was safe in his cockpit, thousands of feet above the ground, but he could feel the anxiety of the troops below him. So he followed his gut and decided he needed to drop below the clouds to see what was happening. And to be clear, this was a dangerous move. There were thick, low-hanging clouds. There were storms all around. He'd be flying blind when he got down there. And if there were enemies, he'd be directly in the line of fire. But Johnny Bravo told his wingman to hang out up there and dove toward the ground. And just as he entered the clouds, his suspicions were confirmed. The words came over the radio. 3 little words that sent shivers down a pilot's spine. Troops in contact. Someone down there was in trouble. And when he popped out of the clouds, Johnny Bravo found himself in a narrow valley, less than 1,000 feet from the ground, with no technology on the Warthog to keep him from crashing into the cliffs on either side. And also no sense of what the valley looked like other than a Russian map from the 1980s. And the sight he saw was unlike anything he'd ever witnessed before. Massive amounts of enemy fire were coming from both sides of the valley, so much that it lit up the whole area. So Johnny dropped in and decided if the Russian map was right, he had 5 seconds before he'd hit the side of a mountain. And he literally counted out loud to himself as he laid down fire on the enemy. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, and then he yanked up on the stick and turned sharply up. And he turned back around to go for another run, wondering if he'd done any good. And finally the call came over the radio, good hits, keep it coming. So he did, again and again and again, counting to 5 each time until finally he was out of ammo. And he called in his wingman, who was nervous about flying into the valley. So Johnny Bravo said, I'll go with you, you follow me, and 3 feet apart they dove together. Johnny counted while his wingman fired, again and again and again. And that night all 22 Special Forces soldiers went home, alive. I wonder, what compels someone to do something like that? I mean, later his commanders said they would have never asked or ordered Johnny Bravo to fly blind into a valley. They'd have told him to wait above the clouds and just hope for a visual, and most, if not all, of those troops would have died, but Johnny went in. Which is a profoundly countercultural thing to do. I mean, maybe not for a soldier, but certainly for a regular person. I mean, it's interesting, in the military they give medals to people who are willing to sacrifice themselves so that others might gain. But in the real world, at school, on the playing field, in the business world, we give honor and we hand out bonuses to people who are willing to sacrifice others so that we might gain. And we live in a world of looking out for number one, where we're taught from a very young age to leverage the people around us for our own benefit. Like every one of us, every person watching online right now has influence somewhere over someone. And we learn early on how we can use that influence to bend the world to our own benefit. But here's the deal. I think maybe the greatest measure of a person's maturity, the greatest measure of greatness in our world is how we handle power, how we handle authority and position, how we handle influence when we have it. At some point in some situation, all of us will realize that like in that exact moment, we're the most important person or the most powerful person in the room. I mean, whether it's a boardroom, a classroom, or a bedroom at our house, at work or at home, with our coworkers, our neighbors, our family, or our friends, in the moments when it hits you, like all eyes are on me, I'm in charge and I get to make the decision, what do? I think most of us would agree that there are few things more frustrating and more disturbing than watching somebody with influence leverage their power for their own benefit in a way that hurts or neglects the people they're responsible for, the people who've chosen to follow them. But at the same time, there are few things more inspiring than watching a leader set aside his or her own personal concerns for the good of all the people who are following them, the people who depend on them, just like Johnny Bravo did that night in Afghanistan. I mean, there's something powerful about people willing to say no to themselves so that they can say yes to somebody else. And that is the story of David as a leader and a king. And just a quick recap of where we've been, because we left off a few weeks ago. David was a middle school-aged kid when the prophet Samuel showed up at his house and said God wanted to anoint one of the sons of Jesse to be the next king of Israel. And God decided to do that because Saul had failed to be the leader God called him to be. But since David was the youngest and the runt of the litter, Jesse didn't even think to bring him inside to meet Samuel. Brought 6 of his brothers, left David out in the field with the sheep. But God said no to all those 6 guys who looked very kingly, and he reminded Samuel that even though on the outside those guys looked like king material, God doesn't look at the outside, he looks at the heart. And he chose David, and a few years later, David's life reinforced this theme as he stared down a mighty giant, a famous warrior named Goliath. And on the outside, it looked like a huge mismatch. But on the inside, it was a mismatch in the other direction because David had big faith in a big God, and he struck down Goliath and saved his people. And became an instant national hero and celebrity. Everybody loved him. And began to lead military expeditions against Israel's enemies. And he kept on winning. And everybody loved him even more. Except King Saul. Saul was selfish and power hungry and super jealous of David. So even though David was best friends with his son and ended up marrying his daughter, Saul decided to hunt him down and kill him. And a couple weeks ago we talked about how unfair that was. How David did nothing wrong, but he was angry, isolated, and afraid. And then he had the opportunity to kill Saul in one of the craziest stories in the entire Bible, which is saying something because it's a book full of crazy and hilarious stories. You really got to read it. I tell you that all the time, but you do. Saul strolls into a cave to drop a number 2 because he's got to go real bad. And David and his men are actually hiding in that exact cave. So David sneaks up on him while he's squatting, which the sights and smells of that had to be super weird. But ultimately he decides, no, I'm not going to kill Saul. Even though he's hunting me down unfairly. Even though God has said his days as king are numbered and I'm the next king, this is not my thing to do. It's murder. And I don't believe God's promises are going to be fulfilled through my disobedience. I can't get what God wants for me by doing what God hates. And so David lets Saul live, just cuts off the corner of his robe. And then Saul finishes his business and walks out of the cave, and David follows him out and calls to him, "Yoo-hoo!" I don't actually know if that's what he said specifically, but anyways, he shows Saul, "Hey man, I could have killed you, but I'm not going to do it." And a few months later, he actually has another opportunity. Saul and his army are all sleeping, and David and his men come upon them. And David looks over at his friend Abishai, and he's like, "Dude, I have a really bad idea. Want to go with me?" And Abishai's like, "Yes." And so they sneak past 3,000 men and steal Saul's spear and his water bottle. And again, in the morning, everybody wakes up. David's up on a hilltop. He's like, "Yoo-hoo!" And seriously, the Bible is full of great moments. But long story short, David ends up spending 8 years of his life, 8 years on the run from Saul. He did nothing to deserve it. He had the chance to end it a couple times, but he refused to take matters into his own hands. So he spends 8 years as an outlaw, wanderer, chilling in the desert with his band of merry men. And this happens after he'd already spent 3 years back out in the fields before the Goliath thing. I mean, he got anointed king and then sent straight back to tending the sheep. Got called to the highest job in Israel, and his dad's like, "No one's looking after those sheep. Go back to the lowest job in Israel," for 3 years. But check it out. There's something David learned during all those years he spent where he didn't want to be. There's something he figured out while he spent what felt like an eternity in a position he felt like he wasn't made for, as a shepherd and a nomad when he believed he was meant to be king. And it was a powerful lesson that shaped the way he would rule. He realized God was doing something in him so that God could do something through him. And the lesson was this: it's not all about me. It's not all about me. God didn't create me just for me. God didn't look into my heart and call me a man after his own heart. God didn't have Samuel anoint me as the future king of Israel just for me. It's not all about me. It's about God. God's will for God's people in God's way in God's time. That's why David didn't kill Saul when he had the chance. I mean, he knew the people loved him. He was a military hero. Everybody knew Samuel had anointed him to be the next king. If Saul was dead, they'd have rallied around him, and he wanted that. Make no mistake, he was sick and tired of running for his life. But he said, "This whole thing is not about me." And so he refused to replace what God had put in place. And eventually, and I'm skipping a whole bunch of good stuff, you're going to have to read 1 and 2 Samuel. Saul and his son Jonathan are killed by the Philistines in battle. And the people of the tribe of Judah come to David and name him king. But for a while, the other tribes, Israel had 12 tribes, decide that maybe Saul's son Ishbosheth should be the king, and they follow him. But eventually he gets killed. And these dudes cut off his head and they bring it to David. And I don't know if this has any value to you at all, but here's a good tidbit that may come in handy somewhere down the line. There are a lot of beheadings in the Bible and in the ancient world. The Old Testament is full of them, and it's kind of gross. But do you know why they beheaded people? Because they didn't have iPhones. Right? That's why. Nobody had a camera. And so the only way to prove somebody was dead was to bring the head. Or the whole body. But that's heavy, and like, how do you grab it? And no one wants to be the one who has to grab the middle. So they just brought the head. Okay? And anyways, David is now the king. More than 2 decades after God promised him that he would be the king. And this is what goes down. This is what 2 Samuel tells us. It says, all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "We are your own flesh and blood. In the past, while Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel on their military campaigns. And the Lord said to you, you will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler." When all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, the king made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. And I realize this seems just kind of like an innocuous little story of David being anointed king, finally crowned by all the elders of all the tribes. But there's something in there that's huge. And it signifies the way David has learned to think about the influence God's given him and the purpose for which God put him in the position he's in. I mean, think about it. They just handed him all the power. The crown is on his head, which means he's holding all the cards. His word is the law. And he already has all the influence. He walked into that meeting as the most powerful person in the nation, and now he's got even more power. And his immediate response to that, 2 Samuel tells us, is to make a covenant with all the leaders of all the tribes. Let me be clear, that's not normal. And it's probably not what they expected. It's certainly not what they deserved. A covenant in this context is a promise. Like, if you guys do this, I'll do that. And for David, it was totally unnecessary. He was the king. He's the sole authority. Why promise them anything? I mean, after he'd been mistreated for all those years, after they had continually turned a blind eye, not supported him while he was on the run, I mean, he could easily have taken his revenge on every single one of those elders, and nobody would have blamed him at all. In fact, they probably expected it. But David stepped into the role of leader by doing something incredibly outrageously powerful. He made a covenant with the people he'd rule over. Why? There's one prepositional phrase, 3 little words that say it all. The king made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord. Before the Lord. He stood up in front of the people he had power and influence over and publicly recognized that he would exercise authority under authority. He submitted himself to God, and this was his way of telling everybody in his entire nation, look, you guys, I am a king, but I am not the king. Which means you all don't exist so I can have power and position. My power and position exist so I can serve you and point you toward God. That's why he put me here, and I intend to do it. It's this crazy moment. Instead of getting a big head and deciding it's all about his own glory now, the poet David writes, who am I, Lord God? And what is my family that you have brought me this far? This is so radical. There's not one story of one other king in the ancient world, good or bad, who began his reign with a covenant like this, by acknowledging that leadership is a stewardship, that anybody with any amount of influence is accountable. The point of power is to use it in a way that lifts others up rather than yourself. David made a covenant with the people of Israel because over all those long years, he had learned that the job of a leader is to be a servant. That leaders sacrifice themselves for the good of others. The point of power is to use it in a way that lifts others up. And again, this is just a simple little snippet of David's giant story, but it's incredibly inspiring for us. It's inspiring, but there's a catch. It's actually not enough for us to be inspired by David's approach to influence. If you're going to follow Jesus, this kind of self-sacrificial greatness is actually required. Part of what Christianity looks like is saying no to us so we can say yes to others. It's sacrificing so that others might gain. And here's why I say that. 1,000 years after David made this covenant, it's crazy to imagine 1,000 years, but 1,000 years later, about 30 miles from Hebron, Jesus looked at his disciples as they were fighting with one another and arguing about greatness and who'd serve whom and who'd have the most power in Jesus' kingdom and who's the best disciple and who got to sit closest to Jesus and like how the kingdom was going to work, which they totally didn't understand. They thought he was going to overthrow Rome and wear a crown and they'd all get to chill in a palace in Jerusalem. And Jesus looks at them as they're fighting about this and says, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. And it's interesting here, the words in Greek for exercise authority and lord it over them are really unique. One of them only shows up a couple other times in the New Testament. The other one isn't found anywhere else in any important place in literature anyone's ever discovered. So what's happening here is Jesus is intentionally using these unique phrases to make a powerful point. People at the top of the food chain, people at the pinnacle of the org chart, people with power, what they do is leverage other people for their own benefit. The way the world works is that everything funnels to the top. And Jesus sits his disciples down. He's like, do you guys know that this is kind of how things work? Like, this is the system? And they're all sitting there like, yes, we know exactly how it works. That's why we're fighting right now about who's going to have the most power, who's going to be like your number 2. Everybody knows how it happens. That you fight to get to the top, because then the people underneath you have to do what you say, and you get the benefits and the glory. And Jesus, we kind of get it. They're like, you're number 1. But when you launch your whole kingdom thing, we really want to be right up there with you. We've been following you. We've sacrificed a lot. Now we feel like we kind of earned it. Time to reap the rewards, baby. And then Jesus says something to them. And to you and you and you and everybody watching this all across Des Moines. And he says it to me and every single one of us who will ever follow him. They're sitting there nodding their heads. You know how the system works? Yeah, we know. We know exactly how it works, and all of us do too. And Jesus drops 4 words in response to them. Ux este in human. Not so with you. He says, you know the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. Their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And just a few days after he said this, Jesus showed the disciples what he meant by strapping on a towel and kneeling down. The greatest among them taking on the role of the lowest servant and washing their dirty feet before the Last Supper. And it shook them up. And right then they thought they understood. But a couple days later, he showed them a whole new level of what it meant. He demonstrated what he meant when he said he'd give his life as a ransom for many by laying down his glory, laying down his power, laying down his divinity, by leveraging everything in love and dying on a cross so that we could all be forgiven and set free. That is what God created us to do with the influence we have. Like self-sacrifice for the sake of the people around us. Risking ourselves so they might gain. That's what we were made for. You guys, that's what living like Jesus looks like. It's what the death and the resurrection of Jesus sets us free to be able to do. Because we're forgiven. Because we're set free. Because death is defeated. And no matter what this shattered world throws our way, the grave is not the final chapter of our story. Because of that, we are liberated from having to make our lives all about us. We have the freedom to give our lives away to the people around us, for the people around us. You guys, every person watching right now has influence somewhere over somebody. I don't care who you are or how old you are, whether you're 8 or 98. All of us now or at some point in the future are going to have the chance to lead. And all of us at some point will have a measure of power and position placed in our hands. What will you do with it when it comes? When you have the chance to sacrifice others so that you can gain, you can stay safe, you can win, or the chance to sacrifice yourself so they can, what will you do? When saying yes to someone else requires saying no to yourself, but you don't have to because you hold all the cards, what will you say then? I think in the end, if we decide to live for ourselves, for our own glory, we'll find that it was too small a thing to have lived for. We'll find that we missed out on the bigger purpose God had for us. Missed out on the chance to create the future we were born to create. David certainly would have. The Bible and all of world history is littered with stories of kings who used their power and their influence for themselves and ultimately failed their people and brought hopelessness and destruction. But David is history's greatest king because he never forgot who was the real king, the King of Kings. And he never forgot why that king had given him the position he had. I mean, he spent years having God work in him, years as a shepherd, learning to put himself on the line for the sheep so that God could work through him one day as he put himself on the line for his people. Just like Jesus did 1,000 years later. And Jesus did that because that's who God is, and that's what God does. Self-sacrifice is what greatness looks like. And our willingness to do it, to follow in the footsteps of our Savior with the influence we have, is the measure of the impact we'll make. Guys, we are living in a dark and anxious time. People all around us, people whose lives we can impact, people we have influence over, are confused and they're afraid. And I know this. A scared world needs a fearless church. A scared world needs a fearless church that's willing to stand in the gap, to give of ourselves and sacrifice our comfort to show love and serve. More than ever, our world needs us to leverage everything we've got to deal hope. And if we're willing to do it, we can be a part of writing a better story in this difficult time. Will you guys pray with me? God, thank you. Thank you for giving everything, leveraging all that you had, your very life in love, so that we could be forgiven and set free. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to be a part of the future you're creating and the story you're writing. God, we're living in a scary time. We pray for all the people who are afraid, for all the people who are affected and infected, for the people who've lost loved ones. Our hearts go out to them, and we cry out for your healing. We cry out for your blessing. We cry out for hope. God, would you just fill us with courage? Fill us with hope. Remind us that because of what you did for us, we can step out into a scared world and be a fearless church that lays ourselves on the line for the sake of the people around us, that uses the power and the influence we have to point people towards the hope that they can find in you. We pray that in Jesus' name. Amen.
1, 2, 3, 4. When darkness tries to roll over my bones, when sorrow comes to steal the joy I own, when brokenness and pain is all I know, oh, I won't be shaken, no, I won't be shaken. 'Cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Your shame no longer has a place to hide, and I am not a captive to the lies. I'm not afraid to leave my past behind. Oh, I won't be shaken, no, I won't be shaken, no. 'Cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Oh, there's power that can break off every